On his way to school, a teenager noticed a crying baby trapped inside a car under the blazing sun. Without a second thought, he shattered the window. But what happened next left everyone around stunned. The morning in Atlanta was blistering, the sun already high in the sky, baking the pavement and making the air shimmer with heat. The city seemed to move in slow motion, weighed down by the oppressive humidity, but for 15-year-old Peter Bennett, there wasn't a second to lose. His sneakers slapped against the cracked sidewalk as he sprinted, his backpack bouncing wildly behind him. He narrowly avoided a trash can and almost collided with a lamppost, muttering curses under his breath. The only thing louder than the thudding of his heart was the endless stream of excuses racing through his mind. Maybe I could say the bus was late, he thought desperately, glancing at his watch. No, Mr. Garvey won't buy that. Peter's history teacher, Mr. Garvey, was notorious for his no-nonsense attitude toward tardiness. 3 late arrivals in a row meant an entire week of school duties, cleaning the cafeteria, erasing chalkboards, and organising books in the library after hours. Peter pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, his shirt sticking uncomfortably to his back. The world around him blurred as familiar landmarks turned into indistinct shapes. His only focus was reaching Jefferson High before the first bell rang. Then, a faint sound caught his attention. At first, it was almost lost in the cacophony of the city, cars honking, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. But, as he passed a near-empty strip mall parking lot, the sound grew clearer. He slowed down, turning toward the lot where an old sedan sat parked in the blazing sun. The sound became unmistakable, a baby crying. Peter froze. He squinted at the car, his heart sinking. Through the tinted glass of the rear window, he could see the outline of a baby in a car seat. As he stepped closer, the scene became clearer. The infant's face was red and shiny with sweat, its tiny fists pounding weakly against the window. "Hey!" Peter shouted, looking around frantically. "Whose car is this?" His voice echoed off the concrete walls of the strip mall. No one answered. The parking lot was nearly deserted, save for a couple of distant figures too far away to notice or care. Peter ran to the car and yanked at the door handle. It didn't budge. The car was locked. "No, no, no," Peter muttered, pulling harder, even though he knew it was pointless. Panic clawed at his chest as he glanced back at the baby. Its cries were growing weaker, its tiny chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. Peter banged on the window with his fist. "Hey! Somebody help! There's a baby in here!" His voice cracked with urgency, but the heat seemed to swallow his words. Sweat dripped into his eyes as he scanned the parking lot for help. He spotted a grocery store entrance about 50 yards away and considered running for it, but the thought of leaving the baby alone made his stomach churn. "Hang on, kid," he whispered, his voice trembling. He glanced around desperately until his eyes landed on a large rock near the edge of the sidewalk. Without a second thought, he grabbed it, feeling its weight in his hand. "Sorry about this," Peter muttered under his breath, lifting the rock over his head. With all his strength, he slammed it against the car's rear window. The glass shattered with an ear-splitting crash, shards scattering across the back seat and the ground. A wave of blistering heat slammed into Peter as he reached through the shattered window, careful not to cut himself on the jagged edges. He fumbled to unlock the door and tugged it open with trembling hands. The baby sat slumped in its car seat, its tiny body frighteningly still. Peter's heart pounded as he leaned in, unbuckling the straps as quickly as his shaking fingers allowed. The baby's skin was burning to the touch, the fabric of the seat damp with sweat. "You'll be okay," Peter whispered, though his voice quivered. He wasn't sure whether he was reassuring the child or himself. As he cradled the baby's limp body against his chest, its faint, shallow breaths sent chills down his spine. Stepping back from the car, Peter glanced around the parking lot, his eyes scanning for someone, anyone, who could help. But the lot was eerily empty, save for the oppressive glare of the sun and the distant hum of traffic. Peter's gaze darted toward the end of the street, where he knew the urgent care clinic was located. 3 blocks. It wasn't far, but with the baby's fragile state, it might as well have been 3 miles. Holding the child tightly, Peter took off running. The heat was suffocating, and his backpack thudded against his back with every stride. His legs burned, his lungs ached, and the pavement seemed to ripple under the blazing sun, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The baby let out a faint wheezing sound, barely a cry, and Peter felt his heart lurch. "Stay with me," he gasped, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his sneakers against the asphalt. "Just hold on. We're almost there." The world around him blurred. Flower shops, a coffee stand, the newspaper kiosk he'd almost crashed into earlier. People turned to watch, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Someone shouted after him, but Peter didn't register the words. Finally, the white facade of the urgent care clinic came into view, and a surge of adrenaline propelled him forward. His shirt clung to his back, drenched with sweat, and his vision swam. But he kept moving. As Peter reached the glass doors, they slid open with a soft hiss. He stumbled inside, his sneakers skidding on the polished floor. The sudden coolness of the air-conditioned lobby felt like a shock, but he barely noticed. "Help! Someone help!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Heads turned in unison, the quiet murmur of the waiting room silenced in an instant. A handful of patients clutching forms and magazines froze, their eyes widening as they took in the sight of the sweating teenager clutching a baby. Behind the reception desk, a nurse stopped mid-motion, a file in her hand. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm as her gaze locked on the child. Peter rushed to the desk, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. "I found this baby. In a car," he stammered, his voice hoarse. It's not breathing right. Please, help." The nurse's professionalism kicked in instantly like a reflex. "Page Dr. Hendricks immediately," she ordered the assistant, who disappeared through the double doors leading to the emergency department. Circling the reception desk, the nurse approached Peter with steady hands and an air of calm authority, though her furrowed brow betrayed her concern. "Where are the baby's parents?" she asked cautiously, her voice low but firm. I don't know," Peter panted, still catching his breath. "He was locked in a car under the sun. He wasn't breathing right. I couldn't leave him there." The nurse's expression softened, but she kept her tone professional. "You did the right thing," she assured him. "Now, let me take the baby." Peter hesitated. He clutched the baby tightly, the small body still hot and frighteningly still against his chest. Letting go felt impossible, like admitting defeat. "It's okay," the nurse said, gently but firmly, holding out her arms. "We'll take care of him now." Peter's hands trembled as he reluctantly passed the baby over. The nurse cradled the child carefully, her movements precise and deliberate. Without another word, she turned and strode swiftly through the emergency doors, leaving Peter standing alone in the middle of the waiting area. His legs buckled and he sank into a plastic chair along the wall. His breath came in uneven gasps as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The waiting room was a blur of muted colours and faint murmurs, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the sterile surroundings. "What happened?" an elderly woman asked the man beside her, her voice a hushed whisper. "Is the baby going to be okay?" A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, his wide eyes filled with worry. Peter heard none of it. His mind was consumed by the baby's faint cries, which now seemed to echo endlessly in his ears. Had he done enough? Could he have acted faster? The weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on his chest. A soft voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Are you all right, son?" Peter looked up to see a woman standing before him. She wore scrubs and a warm but serious expression, her name badge reading Dr. Amanda Hendricks. Her calm demeanour carried the reassurance of someone who had faced countless emergencies. I don't know," Peter admitted, his voice trembling. He gestured weakly toward the emergency doors. I acted on instinct. I didn't know what else to do. His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. Dr. Hendricks pulled a chair closer and sat down beside him, her gaze steady. You did the right thing, she said gently. You saw a child in danger, and you acted. Not everyone would have had the courage to do that. But, Peter's throat tightened. Will he be okay? His voice was barely a whisper filled with dread. Dr. Hendricks paused, her expression compassionate but measured. He's in good hands now, she said, choosing her words carefully. We're doing everything we can to make sure he pulls through. Peter's legs finally gave out, and he collapsed into one of the hard plastic chairs lining the waiting room wall. The adrenaline that had propelled him all this way was gone, leaving him weak and lightheaded. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands as his mind replayed the last few minutes in excruciating detail. The baby's cries, the unbearable heat inside the car, the glass shattering beneath his hands, and the terrifying limpness of the child in his arms. For the first time, the full weight of the fear and horror hit him, and his chest tightened as he struggled to steady his breath. The sound of quick, purposeful footsteps pulled him from the spiral of his thoughts. Looking up, he saw the nurse who had taken the baby walking toward him. Her expression was kind but weary, the face of someone who carried the burden of intense responsibility every day. Peter sat up straight, his heart pounding. The baby is okay, she said, her voice warm but measured, as if she knew how fragile Peter's nerves were. It was close, but you got here in time. That made all the difference. Peter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment relief washed over him like a cool breeze on a scorching day. But almost immediately, new questions swirled in his mind. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He's really okay? The nurse nodded gently. He's still weak and will need monitoring, but his life is no longer in danger. You saved him. Peter closed his eyes, his hands trembling as he pressed them to his knees. The wave of relief was so overwhelming that he felt like he might cry, but he forced the feeling down, not ready to lose control in front of strangers. What about his parents? He asked after a pause, his voice steadier now. Did you find them? The nurse's expression shifted slightly, a mix of concern and professionalism. We've called the police, she said. They're on their way. They'll need to speak with you. The police? Peter blinked, the weight of her words taking a moment to sink in. Up until now, everything had been about the baby, about getting him to safety. He hadn't thought about what might come next. Yes, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. We need to find out what happened, why the baby was left in that car, and for how long. You did everything right, but the authorities will want to hear your account of what you saw and did. Peter nodded slowly, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him. I didn't even think. I saw him there and he looked so. His voice faltered, and he shook his head. I couldn't leave him. The nurse gave him a reassuring smile. That's all anyone could ask for. You acted bravely and quickly, and because of you, that baby has a chance to recover. Peter leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling as her words echoed in his mind. Relief mingled with a lingering sense of worry and helplessness. Somewhere beyond those double doors, the baby he had pulled from that stifling car was clinging to life, and Peter couldn't shake the feeling that he would carry the weight of that fragile existence with him forever. The sharp, sterile smell of antiseptic filled the waiting area, clinging to the air like an invisible fog. Peter sat motionless, his chaotic thoughts spinning in endless circles. He glanced down at his hands, still trembling slightly, the faint scratches from shattered glass a stark reminder of what had just happened. The clatter of swinging doors broke the stillness, jolting him out of his daze. A tall woman in a white coat entered the room, her sharp, purposeful gaze immediately landing on him. "Are you the one who brought in the baby?" she asked, her voice steady but firm, carrying a weight of authority. Peter shot to his feet, the chair screeching loudly against the tiled floor. "Yes," he blurted, his heart racing again. Is he okay?" The doctor approached with a calm, measured confidence that seemed to settle the room. Her badge read Dr. Amanda Hendricks, and her presence exuded a mix of competence and compassion. "You did an amazing thing," she said, her tone softening. "The baby's temperature was dangerously high when you brought him in. He was severely overheated, and we were able to stabilize him just in time. Another 10 minutes. She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "You saved his life." Peter's throat tightened, and he felt a rush of emotion he hadn't anticipated. Tears burned in his eyes, but he blinked them away. The relief was overwhelming, but the weight of her words pressed on him like a tidal wave. "I didn't know what else to do," he murmured, his voice breaking. I couldn't leave him there." Dr. Hendricks nodded, her expression filled with understanding. She noticed the faint scratches on his arms and the weary slump of his shoulders. "It takes courage to act in a moment like that," she said. "Most people would freeze, but you didn't. That baby is alive because of you." Peter shook his head, overwhelmed by the praise. He didn't feel like a hero. He had acted on instinct, without thinking about what came next. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Hendricks asked, her tone shifting slightly, more concerned now. Peter opened his mouth, but no words came out. How was he feeling? He wasn't sure. The adrenaline had left him drained, and in its place was a whirlwind of confusion and exhaustion he couldn't begin to untangle. Dr. Hendricks noticed his hesitation and gestured toward a small break room just off the waiting area. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you some water. You've been through a lot." Without waiting for a response, she started walking, and Peter followed her on unsteady legs. The break room was modest and quiet, with a small table, a few mismatched chairs, and a coffee machine humming softly on the counter. Dr. Hendricks opened a mini-fridge, pulled out a bottle of water and handed it to Peter. He took it with shaking hands and drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. Dr. Hendricks sat across from him, her posture relaxed but attentive. "The police will be here soon," she said gently. "They'll need to talk to you about what happened. Don't worry, they're just trying to understand the situation. You're not in trouble." Peter nodded slowly, the thought of speaking to the police tightening the knot in his stomach. "I just don't get it," he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could someone forget about their own child? How does that even happen?" Dr. Hendricks sighed, her expression growing serious. "It's hard to understand, but unfortunately, it happens more often than people think," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Sometimes it's a mistake, a parent overwhelmed, distracted, or caught up in their routine. And sometimes—" she hesitated, her eyes clouding briefly with memories she didn't share. "Sometimes it's neglect." Peter clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he struggled to process everything. How could someone abandon a child like that? The image of the baby's flushed, sweat-soaked face and faint, labored breathing replayed in his mind like a cruel loop. Noticing the tension in his posture, Dr. Hendricks softened her tone. "You did everything you could," she reassured him. "Because of you, that baby has a real chance to recover." Peter opened his mouth to respond, but a knock at the door cut him off. He turned to see a uniformed police officer stepping into the room, a notebook in hand. The officer's demeanor was professional yet approachable, his expression neutral but attentive. "Is this the boy?" the officer asked, his gaze shifting to Dr. Hendricks. "Yes," she confirmed. "He's the one who brought the baby in." The officer nodded and stepped further into the room, addressing Peter directly. "I'm Officer Mark Sullivan," he said. "I need to ask you a few questions about what happened. Are you ready?" Peter felt a pang of anxiety rise in his chest, but he nodded. "Yes, I'm ready. Officer Sullivan pulled out a chair, sitting down across from Peter. He glanced briefly at Dr. Hendricks. Have you contacted his parents yet? Dr. Hendricks shook her head. Not yet, but we'll handle that now. She turned to the nurse standing nearby. Do we have his emergency contact information on file? The nurse nodded. Yes, he filled it out when he came in. I'll call them now. Thank you, Dr. Hendricks replied, giving Peter an encouraging nod before stepping aside to let the officer continue. Sullivan opened his notebook, his pen poised over the page. All right, young man, let's start with the basics. What's your name? Peter Bennett, he replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. How old are you, Peter? 15. And where do you go to school? Jefferson High. Sullivan jotted down the information, his pen moving swiftly. Do you live near where this happened? Yes, about 10 minutes away, Peter said. At that moment, the nurse returned, holding a clipboard. I've contacted his mum, she informed them. She's on her way and should be here soon. Good, Sullivan said with a nod, then turned back to Peter. All right, Peter, let's talk about what happened. Start from the beginning. Where were you? And how did you find the baby? Peter took a deep, shaky breath, gathering his thoughts. He began recounting everything as clearly as he could. The faint, weak crying that had drawn his attention, the locked car baking under the relentless sun, the unbearable heat radiating from its windows, and the split-second decision to break the glass and rescue the baby. His voice wavered as he described the moment he smashed the window, shards flying everywhere, and how he had carefully cradled the fragile child, rushing it to the clinic with every ounce of strength he had left. Officer Sullivan listened intently, his pen scratching against the notebook as Peter spoke. He didn't interrupt, though his steady gaze never wavered. When Peter finally finished, his words hanging in the air like a weight, Sullivan paused for a moment before asking, You said no one else was in the parking lot. Are you absolutely sure about that? Peter nodded firmly. I looked around. I shouted for help. There wasn't anyone there. Not near the car, anyway. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully, closing his notebook with a soft snap. Thank you, Peter, he said, his voice calm but sincere. What you did was incredibly brave. Breaking that window was a risk. It's not something we recommend lightly. But in this case, it probably saved that baby's life. That's not something we see every day. Peter slouched slightly in his chair, the weight of the praise making him feel both proud and uncomfortable. He glanced down at his hands, the scratches from the glass faint but visible. I just couldn't leave him there, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Standing quietly by the wall, Dr. Hendricks stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on Peter's shoulder. I think that's enough for now, she said, her tone gentle but firm. She looked at Sullivan with an air of quiet authority. He's been through a lot today. Sullivan nodded, rising from his chair. Of course, he said. He turned to Peter, his expression softening. Thank you again, Peter. You did something extraordinary today. If we need any more information, we'll contact your parents. After the officer left, Dr. Hendricks sat down across from Peter again. Her calm demeanour and steady gaze brought a small sense of stability to the chaos in his mind. You're handling this better than many adults would, she said warmly. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's completely normal. What you did today, it's a lot. Peter looked down at his hands, which were still trembling slightly. Tiny scratches marked his skin, a physical reminder of the shattered glass. What happens next? He asked, his voice quieter now. To the baby, I mean. Dr. Hendricks folded her hands on the table, her expression thoughtful. For now, he'll stay here until we're confident he's fully recovered. After that, it's up to the police to figure out what happened. If they find his parents, they'll have questions to answer. She paused briefly, her tone growing more serious. If they don't... Peter sat up a little straighter, his heart tightening. If they don't? Dr. Hendricks hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Then, Child Protective Services may get involved. Peter's stomach knotted at the unfamiliar term. Protective Services? He asked hesitantly. She nodded. If the parents aren't found, or if it's determined they can't take care of the baby, he could be placed in foster care. It's not always an easy path, but the system exists to keep children safe. Peter's heart clenched at the thought of the baby, so small and helpless, ending up with strangers. The idea of him being shuffled between homes made his chest ache. "Do you think they just forgot him?" he asked, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. Dr. Hendricks sighed heavily, leaning back in her chair. "It's possible," she admitted. "People make mistakes, even terrible ones. But there's also a chance it wasn't an accident. That's what the investigation will determine." Peter leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had acted purely on instinct, but now he understood the enormity of the situation he'd stumbled into. The baby's fate wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what came next. Sensing his turmoil, Dr. Hendricks reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. "You did the right thing, Peter. No matter how this turns out, that baby is alive because of you. Don't forget that." Before Peter could respond, the nurse appeared in the doorway again, her voice quick but calm. "Doctor, the baby's condition has stabilized. His vitals are improving." Dr. Hendricks exhaled deeply, her shoulders visibly relaxing. "Thank you," she said, standing up. Peter watched her leave the room, a quiet wave of relief washing over him. The tight knot in his chest loosened just a little. The baby was safe, for now. Hours passed, though Peter wasn't entirely sure how many. Time blurred in the small, quiet break room. Outside, the police had returned to the clinic, their presence sparking hushed whispers among the staff and curious glances from patients. Peter stayed put, too tense to venture out. He sat with his head in his hands, the weight of the day pressing down on him like a physical force. The sound of the door creaking open made him look up, expecting another police officer. Instead, his mother rushed in, her face pale and etched with fear. "Peter!" she cried, her voice breaking as she hurried to him. She wrapped him in a tight hug, her hands trembling as they gripped his shoulders. "What's going on? They told me you broke a car window. Are you hurt? Do you realize how dangerous that was?" Peter opened his mouth to explain, but before he could get a word out, Officer Sullivan entered the room behind her. "Mom, please," he said gently, holding up a hand. "Your son didn't do anything wrong. In fact, he may have saved a baby's life today." Peter's mother froze, her eyes widening as she turned to the officer. "A baby?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Sullivan nodded, stepping further into the room. "Yes, Mom. A baby was left in a locked car under the sun. Your son found him, broke the window to get him out, and brought him here to the clinic. If he hadn't acted as quickly as he did, the baby wouldn't have survived." Peter's mother stared at Sullivan, processing his words. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "A baby?" Sullivan nodded again, his expression serious but kind. What Peter did was incredibly brave. He didn't hesitate to act in an emergency. He did the right thing. Her eyes filled with tears as she turned back to Peter, pulling him into another hug. "You saved a baby," she murmured, her voice trembling. "My God, Peter, I thought you'd gotten yourself into trouble." She pulled back slightly, running her hand through his hair as if to reassure herself that he was truly okay. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Just a few scratches," Peter admitted, glancing at his hands. "I'm fine, really." She let out a shaky sigh, pressing her hand to her heart. "I was so scared when they called me, but now, I'm so proud of you." Her voice broke again, and she hugged him tightly, her tears dampening his shoulder. Officer Sullivan waited patiently, allowing them their moment. When Peter's mother finally loosened her grip, he spoke again. "We'll need to go over a few more details with you, Mom, but I want to reiterate, Your son did an extraordinary thing today. Peter's mother nodded, her hand still resting protectively on her son's arm. Thank you, she said softly to Sullivan. Thank you for letting me know. Sullivan gave a small smile. You should be very proud of him, he said, then stepped back, giving them space. At that moment, another officer entered the room, his expression tinged with relief. We've located the baby's parents, he announced. They're already at the clinic. Officer Sullivan nodded. Good. We'll speak with them and get all the facts. Peter's mother, still holding him close, turned to the officer. Does this mean there's no issue with my son? None whatsoever, Sullivan assured her. His actions saved a life. She exhaled deeply, her grip on Peter's hand loosening just slightly. Peter could feel the tension in her body beginning to ease, though her protective hold on him didn't falter. The room grew quiet for a moment until Peter straightened in his chair, his mind racing. The parents are here? He asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and frustration. What did they say? Dr. Hendricks returned then, taking a seat across from them. Her expression was calm, but the slight furrow in her brow betrayed her unease. She clasped her hands together on the table, leaning forward slightly. The child's father arrived shortly after the police traced the car's registration, she explained. He was devastated. From what he told the officers, he thought the mother had taken the baby out of the car when they arrived at the store. He didn't realize the child was still inside. Peter's stomach churned, a mixture of disbelief and anger swirling within him. Forgot? He said, his voice rising slightly. How do you forget your own child? Dr. Hendricks sighed deeply, her expression weary. It's not easy to understand, Peter, she said gently. But people underestimate how dangerous distractions, stress, and routine can be. Sometimes, in moments of exhaustion or preoccupation, mistakes happen. But this isn't just a mistake, Peter insisted, his voice trembling with emotion. That baby almost died. Dr. Hendricks nodded solemnly. You're absolutely right. That's why the police are speaking with both parents now to determine whether this was a misunderstanding or something more serious. Peter's mother squeezed his hand, grounding him as his mind raced. What happens if they find out it wasn't just an accident? She asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. If there's evidence of negligence or intent, there could be legal consequences, Dr. Hendricks explained carefully. The safety and well-being of the child are the top priorities, and if the parents are deemed unfit, Child Protective Services will step in. The door opened again, and Officer Sullivan stepped inside. His expression was firm but measured, giving Peter a small nod. Peter, the baby's parents would like to speak with you. If you're ready, I can arrange it. Peter hesitated, his heart pounding. The thought of meeting the people who had left their child in such a dangerous situation churned his stomach. Anger bubbled beneath his calm exterior, mingling with the unease that had been building all day, but after a moment he nodded. Okay. Sullivan led him down the hallway, their footsteps echoing softly against the tiled floor. He stopped in front of a small consultation room and opened the door. Peter stepped inside and his breath caught in his throat. A man sat at the table, his head buried in his hands. Beside him, a woman stood by the window, hugging herself tightly. The air in the room was heavy with tension and unspoken regret. When Peter entered, the man lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen, his face lined with guilt. "Are you the young man who saved my son?" the man asked, his voice trembling. Peter froze, unsure of what to say. Before he could answer, the woman turned from the window. Her face was streaked with tears, and her lips quivered as she tried to speak. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't even know." Her words dissolved into sobs, and she covered her face with her hands. The man stood, his movements hesitant and unsteady. "You gave us a second chance," he said, his voice breaking. "If it weren't for you..." He faltered, unable to finish the sentence. Peter's anger, simmering beneath the surface, boiled over. He clenched his fists and took a step forward. "How could you leave a baby in a car?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Do you even understand how close it was? Your son almost—" His voice cracked and he stopped, unable to say the words. The man winced, shrinking back as if the weight of Peter's words had physically struck him. "I thought my wife had taken him," he whispered, his tone laced with despair. "I swear, I thought—" "You were wrong," Peter snapped, his voice trembling with emotion. "Do you have any idea what that baby went through? The heat, the crying, he couldn't even breathe right." The woman let out a fresh sob, leaning against the window as if she might collapse under the weight of her own guilt. The door opened quietly, and Dr. Hendricks entered the room. She placed a steadying hand on Peter's shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. "Peter," she said softly, "I understand your anger, and you have every right to feel this way. But this family will carry the consequences of this day for the rest of their lives. They made a terrible mistake, but it's not our place to punish them." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The man sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping forward in defeat. The woman turned away from the window and sank into the chair beside him, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. Peter glanced between them, his emotions a tangled knot of frustration, pity, and fear for the baby's future. His chest heaved as he tried to calm the storm inside him. Dr. Hendricks turned her attention to the parents, her tone now firm but compassionate. "Your son is stable," she said. "He's going to recover, thanks to Peter's actions. But this incident will have consequences, legal, emotional, and otherwise. The police and Child Protective Services will work with you to ensure the safety and well-being of your child moving forward." The parents nodded, their gratitude muted by their overwhelming guilt. The man turned back to Peter, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Thank you," he said again. "I'll never be able to repay you for what you did." Peter looked at him, his jaw tight. "Just make sure you don't let this happen again," he said, his voice steadier now, though the pain behind it was still evident. The man nodded solemnly, his head bowing under the weight of his remorse. Dr. Hendricks gave Peter's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, guiding him toward the door. "You've done enough, Peter," she said quietly. "Let the authorities handle the rest." As the police officer escorted Peter back into the corridor, the man's voice called out behind them. "Thank you," he said, his tone trembling with emotion. "You'll never know how much this means to us." Peter didn't turn around or respond. The weight of the day clung to him like a heavy cloak, and his steps down the hallway felt slow and deliberate. The adrenaline that had driven him all day was long gone, leaving only exhaustion and a faint ache in his chest. At the clinic's exit, Dr. Amanda Hendricks caught up to him. "Peter," she said, her voice warm yet firm, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. He stopped and turned to face her. "I know today has been incredibly hard for you," she continued, "but you need to understand something important. What you did today was an act of courage and compassion. It wasn't just about saving that baby, it was about showing everyone, his parents, the staff here, the police, and anyone who hears this story, what selflessness truly means." Peter lowered his gaze to his hands, his fingers still faintly scratched from the shattered glass. He didn't know what to say. Her words felt too big to process, too heavy to grasp fully in the moment. Dr. Hendricks gave him a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay if you don't feel it yet. Just know that your actions today will have a lasting impact. That little boy has a future because of you." Peter nodded slowly. Deep down he knew she was right. When he stepped outside with his mother, the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the city in a warm glow. The soft light stretched across the pavement, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of a cooler evening. Peter paused at the clinic's steps, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. His mother stood beside him, her arm resting protectively around his shoulders. "I'm so proud of you, Peter," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. He glanced at her and gave a faint smile, though he wasn't sure what to say. His mind was still replaying the events of the day, the baby's fragile cries, the unbearable heat, the desperation he'd felt breaking that car window. Looking out toward the horizon, Peter allowed himself to feel something he hadn't let in all day. A flicker of hope. The baby was safe. The parents had a chance to make things right. And maybe, just maybe, he'd discovered something within himself he hadn't known was there. A strength, a courage, a willingness to act when it mattered most. In the days that followed, Peter couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The bustling rhythm of life in Moscow resumed as if nothing had changed, but for him, everything was different. During class, his thoughts drifted away from lessons, back to the baby he had saved. The tiny, flushed face burned vividly into his memory. The sound of the faint, weak cries lingered in his mind, haunting him in quieter moments. Soon, Peter heard through the local news and word of mouth that the baby's parents had been fined for endangering their child. The court had also sentenced them to probation, requiring them to attend parenting courses and undergo regular visits from social services. The news gave Peter mixed feelings. On one hand, he understood the measures were necessary to ensure the baby's safety. On the other, he couldn't shake the anger and disappointment that it had come to this, that someone needed laws and oversight to protect their own child. Still, he found a degree of comfort in knowing the baby would now be safer. He hoped with time, this experience would make the parents more responsible. Word of Peter's actions spread quickly through his school and neighborhood. Classmates whispered about him in the hallways, and neighbors stopped him on the street to offer kind words and admiration. "You're a real hero," one elderly woman said as she passed him near a market. "Such bravery at your age," another man remarked, clapping Peter on the shoulder. But for Peter, the attention was overwhelming. "I didn't do anything special," he muttered whenever someone praised him. Yet deep down, a part of him knew that wasn't entirely true. One afternoon, while sitting in the back row of history class, Peter's phone vibrated softly in his pocket. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching and then slid the phone out just enough to read the notification. It was a message from Dr. Amanda Hendricks. "Hello, Peter. I've been thinking about everything that happened and how you handled it. Would you like to visit the clinic again? I think it might be good for you." Peter stared at the screen, rereading the message several times. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. The clinic was where everything had unfolded, where the weight of the day had hit him hardest. The idea of going back stirred a mix of emotions, reluctance, curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite define. But he also remembered Dr. Hendricks' steady gaze and calm voice, the way she had guided him through the chaos with quiet strength. Finally, he typed out a short reply. "Okay. When?" When Peter returned to the clinic, it wasn't as a hero but as a curious visitor. The bustling energy of the building felt different this time, less overwhelming, more welcoming. Dr. Amanda Hendricks greeted him at the entrance, her warm smile exactly as he remembered it. "Thank you for coming," she said, motioning for him to follow her. As they walked down the now familiar hallways, she glanced over at him. "I thought you might like to see another side of this place, one that people often overlook." Peter nodded, unsure of what to expect. She led him to a room tucked away from the main corridors. Inside, shelves were stacked with medical supplies, boxes of bandages, gloves, syringes, and neatly labeled medications. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the fluorescent lights hummed softly above. "This is where it all begins," Dr. Hendricks said, handing him a pair of medical gloves. "Everything we do out there," she gestured toward the hall, "starts here, with preparation, organization, and care." Peter hesitated as he pulled on the gloves. "I don't really know how to do anything like this," he admitted, glancing uncertainly at the shelves. Dr. Hendricks gave him an encouraging smile. "You don't need to. All that's required is your help and a willingness to understand what we do here." She handed him a small clipboard with an inventory list. Let's start by organizing these boxes. I'll show you how. Following her instructions, Peter began stacking and sorting, carefully placing items on the correct shelves. At first, it felt mundane, but as they worked, Dr. Hendricks began to talk about the clinic and the people who came through its doors every day. Most of the time, it's routine, she explained. Checkups, minor injuries, prescriptions. But then there are days when it's anything but routine. Days like the one you experienced. Peter paused, his hands hovering over a box of syringes. Do you get a lot of emergencies like that? He asked. Dr. Hendricks nodded. More than you'd think, and every one of them reminds us why we're here. What you did for that baby reminded me too. Peter looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? She placed a box of gloves on the shelf and turned to him, her expression thoughtful. It's easy to get lost in the grind. Paperwork, protocols, long shifts. You start to forget the real reason you chose this profession, but then someone like you comes along and it all becomes clear again. Every life we touch matters. Every decision we make matters. And every act of kindness, no matter how small or instinctive, can change someone's world. Peter listened, her words sinking in. He thought about the baby, the panic he'd felt, and the sheer determination that had driven him to act. He hadn't felt brave at the time, just desperate to help. I didn't really think about it, Peter admitted. I just knew I had to do something. Dr. Hendricks smiled. And that's what makes it so extraordinary, Peter. You didn't act for recognition or reward. You acted because it was the right thing to do. They continued organizing the shelves in silence for a while, the quiet rhythm of their work calming Peter's restless thoughts. Slowly, he began to feel a sense of pride, not from the attention he'd received, but from the knowledge that his actions had made a difference. When they finished organizing the storage room, Dr. Hendricks led Peter down the hall toward one of the pediatric wards. The cheerful colors on the walls and the soft hum of conversation from the nurses' station created a welcoming atmosphere, though Peter still felt out of place. Inside one of the rooms, a boy of about 5 sat on a small couch, his legs nervously swinging back and forth. His big brown eyes darted around the room as he clutched a well-loved stuffed animal. Next to him stood his mother, her face lined with worry as she smoothed her son's hair. "This is Misha," Dr. Hendricks said with a smile, gesturing to the boy. "He's here for a checkup, but he's feeling a bit nervous." She turned to Peter. "Would you mind staying with him for a few minutes while I review his chart?" Peter hesitated, caught off guard by the request. "Me." Dr. Hendricks gave him an encouraging nod. "You're good with people, Peter. I think you'll help him feel more comfortable." Peter glanced at Misha, whose curious gaze had shifted to him. After a moment, Peter nodded. "Of course." As Dr. Hendricks stepped out, Peter moved closer, crouching slightly to be at Misha's eye level. The boy watched him carefully, still clutching his stuffed animal. "Are you a doctor?" Misha asked, his voice small but filled with curiosity. Peter laughed lightly. "Not at all. I'm just here to help out a bit." Misha's shoulders relaxed a little, and he even managed a shy smile. "Doctors are scary," he admitted. "But you're not." "Well, that's good to hear," Peter said with a grin. He pulled up a chair and sat down. "So, what's that you've got there?" he asked, pointing to the stuffed animal. "This is Max," Misha said, holding up the slightly tattered bear. "He's a superhero. He keeps me safe." Peter nodded seriously. "Max looks pretty tough. What's his superpower?" Misha's face lit up as he launched into an enthusiastic explanation about Max's adventures, his nervous energy melting away with each word. Peter listened intently, asking questions and making exaggerated reactions to keep the boy smiling. By the time Dr. Hendricks returned, Misha was laughing, his legs no longer swinging anxiously. His mother gave Peter a grateful smile, and Peter felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't expected. Later, as they walked down the corridor, Dr. Hendricks glanced at Peter. "You have a gift," she said thoughtfully, "the ability to connect with people. It's something you can't teach. Peter shrugged, feeling both embarrassed and a little proud. I just talked to him, he said. Exactly, she replied, her tone firm. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. Not everyone can do what you just did. Her words stayed with Peter as they walked toward the main hallway. Just before they reached the exit, Dr. Hendricks stopped and turned to him, her expression serious yet kind. And have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up? She asked. The question caught Peter off guard. He shifted his weight uncomfortably. I don't know, he admitted after a moment. I guess I haven't really thought about it before. That's okay, she said with a reassuring smile. But after what I saw today, I believe you have the potential to do something great. You don't have to be a doctor, but maybe you can find a place where you can help people. Think about it. Her words were both encouraging and a little intimidating. Peter nodded, unsure of what to say, but something about her tone made him feel like she truly believed in him. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his history textbook open in front of him, Peter found himself unable to focus on the words. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting back to Misha's laughter, the doctor's encouraging words, and the baby he had saved. Something had shifted within him. Thoughts of the future no longer filled him with dread. They sparked a flicker of determination. He didn't know exactly how, but he wanted to do something meaningful, something that made a difference. Peter soon returned to the clinic, eager to take his first steps as a volunteer. With Dr. Hendricks' approval and guidance, he signed up to help on weekends and during school breaks. On his first day, as he stepped into the clinic wearing a badge that read, Volunteer, his heart raced. The weight of responsibility felt both exhilarating and intimidating. Dr. Hendricks greeted him at the entrance, her warm smile instantly calming his nerves. Welcome back, Peter, she said. Let's get started. The day was a whirlwind of activity. Peter helped organize paperwork, delivered files between departments, and watched nurses prepare sterilization equipment. The work was often routine, but the rhythm and purpose of the clinic captivated him. The bustling energy, the quiet focus of the staff, and the occasional laughter of a child in the pediatric wing all filled him with a growing sense of belonging. After lunch, Dr. Hendricks approached him in the hallway, her expression curious and her smile slightly mischievous. There's someone who wants to see you, she said. Peter blinked, confused. Me? Who? You'll see, she replied, leading him down the corridor toward a private consultation room. Inside, Peter froze. Sitting on a small couch were the parents of the baby he had saved. The father held the child, now healthy and alert, his sparkling eyes filled with curiosity. The baby reached up to grab his father's nose, giggling with a playful mischief that was infectious. Peter, the father began, his voice trembling. He stood, cradling the baby in his arms. I don't even know how to thank you. You saved our son's life. Because of you, we still have our family. Peter swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. The mother stood next to her husband, her eyes brimming with emotion. She stepped forward, holding out a small box carefully wrapped in blue paper. This is for you, she said softly. It's not much, but we wanted you to have something to remind you of what you did. Blushing, Peter accepted the gift, his cheeks flushing a deep pink. You don't need to thank me, he murmured, his voice almost shy. I just did what anyone would have done. The mother shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. That's where you're wrong, she said. Not everyone would have done what you did. You didn't hesitate. You acted when it mattered most. That's something extraordinary. With trembling fingers, Peter carefully unwrapped the box. Inside was a small framed photograph of the baby, now smiling and full of life. On the frame was an engraving that read, You gave us hope. Thank you. Peter stared at the picture, his chest tightening with emotion. He looked up at the parents, then back at the baby, who was now reaching out toward him with tiny hands. Hesitantly, Peter extended a finger and the baby grabbed it, giggling softly. You're a hero to our family, the father said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "We'll never forget what you did." After the parents left, Peter found himself sitting with Dr. Hendricks in one of the quieter corridors of the clinic. The framed photograph rested in his lap, his fingers lightly tracing the engraving. "I didn't expect this," he admitted, still gazing at the baby's joyful face in the photo. Dr. Hendricks leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "It's moments like these that remind us why we do this work," she said softly. "It's not always easy, and it doesn't always bring immediate satisfaction. But when you see the impact you've made in someone's life, everything falls into place." Peter nodded, her words resonating deeply within him. He thought back to the scorching day he had found the baby, to the panic that had gripped him and the instinct that had driven him forward. From that day on, Peter became a regular fixture at the clinic. Each week he eagerly looked forward to his shifts. He grew comfortable with the bustling rhythm of the clinic, navigating hallways filled with patients, staff, and the occasional chaos. Every day brought new lessons, some small, some profound, and he began to understand how even the tiniest contributions could make a difference. The nurses and doctors noticed Peter's dedication, but what stood out most was his unique ability to connect with patients. Whether it was a child crying before a vaccination or an elderly patient feeling anxious about an upcoming procedure, Peter had a way of easing their fears with his kind words and genuine smile. The most frightened children would soon be laughing at his silly jokes or captivated by his stories. "You have a gift," one of the nurses told him one day, watching as Peter coaxed a giggle out of a nervous toddler. "Not everyone can do what you do." Peter's confidence grew alongside his skills. He began to see the clinic not just as a place of healing, but as a world of possibilities. With each passing day, his vision of the future became clearer. What had once been a vague thought, maybe helping people somehow, transformed into a burning ambition. One afternoon, during a rare, quiet moment, Dr. Hendricks sat with Peter in the staff lounge. "You've changed," she remarked, sipping her tea. "You've become more focused. It's like you've found your purpose." Peter paused, considering her words. Finally, he admitted, "I think I know what I want to do. I want to help people. Maybe even become a doctor, like you." Dr. Hendricks' face lit up with pride, but she tempered it with a note of caution. "That's a wonderful goal, Peter. But you should know the road ahead won't be easy. Medical school takes years of hard work, and a doctor's life isn't always simple. It's a commitment that changes your whole life." Peter nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "I know, but after what happened, I can't imagine doing anything else. I want to be the kind of person who makes a difference every day, no matter how hard it is." Moved by his conviction, Dr. Hendricks decided to support him. She connected him with a local mentorship program for high school students interested in medicine. "This will give you a glimpse of what it takes to be a doctor," she said. "It's a start." Peter threw himself into the program with the same dedication he showed at the clinic. He began shadowing doctors on their rounds, observing their work and learning how every detail mattered in patient care. These experiences only deepened his desire to follow this path. Yet Peter understood that the journey ahead would be daunting. Getting into medical school seemed like an insurmountable challenge. He would need to excel academically, navigate financial hurdles, and battle his own moments of doubt. But he also knew he wasn't alone. He had people who believed in him, and he had the memory of the lives he'd already touched. One evening, Peter sat at the kitchen table, a university guidebook spread out in front of him. His eyes lingered on the section about medical programs. The sheer number of years required, the intensity of the coursework, and the sacrifices ahead felt overwhelming. For a moment, he wondered if he was aiming too high, if he was foolish to believe he could achieve such a dream. But then he remembered the baby's face, healthy and smiling in the photograph the parents had given him. He remembered the gratitude in their eyes and the hope he'd brought into their lives. Peter closed the guidebook, his heart steadying as a deep resolve settled within him. He didn't have all the answers, and the path ahead wasn't clear, but one thing he knew for certain. This was the path he was meant to take.